Hi guys, welcome to my talk about Odoo Enterprise and MedTech. As you already see, we changed the title a little bit because we're going to focus more on MedTech than on Pharma today, but overall they're very similar in many ways. So if you're more interested on the Pharma side, also feel free to come by our booth. It's right over there after the talk, and we can give you a lot more input on the Pharma side of things as well. But just because we only have 20 minutes, we limited the content a little bit. So I'm going to very quickly introduce myself and the company I work for, and then we're going to dive straight into the MDR and FDA compliance, also a little bit about the differences, and then dive into the processes and how you can solve all of this inside of Odoo, and how we have done it with other clients. So I'm Simon Stappen. I'm one of the managing partners at Much Consulting. Much Consulting is a Munich and Lisbon-based Odoo partner. We are fully focused on Odoo. We have about 80 consultants and engineers. We focus a lot on process consulting and on automation, which also comes in very handy here. And we have implemented over 200 Odoos in many countries. And as you can see, we do not only operate in Germany, but we also operate a lot for international clients across Western Europe and the US especially. If you want to have the slides after the talk, you can scan this QR code. It will come up later again. We will send you the slides, some additional information, and some contact information, so you don't need to make any pictures from the slides during the presentation. You will receive everything just afterwards in the next days by mail. All right, so let's go. First of all, what is MDR regulation and what is the device regulation of the FDA? First of all, often in Europe we talk about the MDR because the regulators are in each of the countries. It's not multinational, while in the US it's often talked about FDA. In any case, both are device regulations for medical devices. In the EU we have a regulation specifically for medical devices. In the US there's a lot of different laws and regulations that play together a little bit. And it's a lot more based on the ISO certifications, as you probably already know. And in Europe, the regulators, they focus a lot more on compliance, so on actually following the rules. While in the US, what we see often is the focus is a lot more on safety. In the end, most medical device companies we work with, they want to be able to sell everywhere in the world. And for that, having the European and American approval is very crucial. So what we're trying to do here in the beginning is always find out what are the differences for the specific risk class between the two regulations, and then basically implement for the stricter one. And as the focus is a little bit different, usually the certification for the processes in Europe first, because it's a lot more compliance process driven, and secondly, it's more common to go in the US when the product is more ready and check out safety. So what you should keep in mind for the rest of the presentation, we are looking always both at MDR and the DR regulation of the FDA. The EU side is a lot stricter on the compliance, but in the end they're quite similar, and there's usually only a small amount of deviations for most of the risk classes. Both of the regulators strongly built on the ISO 13485. You probably already know it. It's the medical device quality management standards. And there are basically 4 principles in these standards that we're going to see throughout the entire presentation. And they're going to be connected to all the things we want to do later in our processes in Odoo. So we want to have a quick look into the 6 main principles. So first of all, it's the customer focus. There's many things in here. First of all, obviously, we want to know exactly which customer, which can be the end user, but also the doctors and intermediaries, which device went where, who has what device. We want to be able to gather the feedback, handle complaints, corrective actions based on customer feedback, do preventive actions. There's obviously a lot more that falls into this, but from a process standpoint, I think these are the most important ones. We have our employee participation and involvement. As you know, the quality mindset, it has to come top down, but also bottom up. So it's very, very critical to include all employees and also obviously record and document their actions later for our processes. Thirdly, we have adapting the process approach. I mean, this is really in the core of everything we're going to talk about today, right? Since we're talking about how can we do these regulations in Odoo, which is a process management suite, really. So this is going to be very much in the focus. But obviously, having processes that are documented and standardized makes them reliable, repeatable, and improvable in the end as well. So the process approach is really a basis for all the other three that we have left. Next, we have the risk-based decision making, obviously both on the product side, but we're going to focus a little bit more on the process side, how we can support this on the process side here. And for this, a good example is always, if you trace a device failure to a specific part, right, you obviously want to know which of these parts are from the same batch and in what final devices were they installed. So you can maybe recall also a lot of other devices as well, so you know exactly what could be affected. And this is really a good example of the risk-based decision making in a process context here. Fifth, we have the continuous improvement. So as always, you have the classic PDSA framework that you should apply, and this should also apply for the processes that we then do in Odoo, which means we need to monitor them, we need to obviously have a plan, we need to execute them, and then study the impact, study how they see, and do ongoing improvements. So most of the time, these processes are obviously not final, they're going to be improved over time. And last but not least, and there I think, same as the process approach is really at the core of what we're going to talk today, is the documentation and records. Everything that you basically do needs to be documented and recorded, and obviously, if everything happens on one system, that's going to be a lot easier. So keep these guiding principles in mind for all the other things that we're going to talk about today. So, how do we break this whole problem down? As you know, the plan is really the most important step to find out what we need overall. And for this, we worked with some consulting partners from the MedTech industry, and we're using this process framework to split it in management processes, in our core business processes, which are obviously the core of the ERP, and into support processes. And what we usually see at most of the MedTech companies is that there is a huge amount of different tools. I mean, I'm putting them in 6 categories here, but we usually see 20, 25 tools to basically cover all these base processes. And as you know, this is a big issue because if the data is scattered everywhere, it's very difficult to then bring data together. If I have a CRM and the delivery system separate, it's getting more and more difficult to connect the customer with the final devices. If I have a different field management service system, it's getting more difficult to actually keep track what parts are exactly in which device, right? So usually you have this very scattered landscape, a lot of Excel, a lot of Word, a lot of paper as well we see. And then you have all the specialized tools. And one of the big advantages of Odoo is that you can very much simplify and streamline this whole environment, which then also significantly reduces complexity and makes it a lot easier to get certified. And for this, we can obviously move all the core business processes in Odoo. There's obviously a few things in product management and R&D where you will need additional software as well. It's not possible to do this all in Odoo, right? Odoo is not a CAD tool. Odoo is not a clinical study tool. But a lot of the things we can do in Odoo, or there's going to be a support process in Odoo as well. And what we do is for each customer, we obviously look into all of these processes, look in the specific risk class they have, and try to find out what they need to do based on the business model, based on what they do, and how we can model this in Odoo. And obviously, a lot of these things, they basically have the same name as an Odoo app, right? So we have sales with the sale app in Odoo. That's obviously highly related. So most of these topics you can already solve by the corresponding apps. For HR, you have a whole suite. You can manage skills, you can manage employee certifications. So Odoo already covers most of the main processes that you need to have and that you obviously also need to certify and supervise for your certifications. But there's a few, and these are the ones we marked here in red, that Odoo, from our point of view, does not do in the standard. And we're going to focus for the rest of the talk a little bit on these processes, how you can fulfill them in Odoo, and what possible solutions are. We're going to focus on 3 examples here, but if you're interested, we have solutions for all of them. So yeah, please hit us up, and we're happy to explain the others as well to anyone that's interested. Before we start into the processes though, I want to quickly talk about the life cycle, because as you know, in MedTech, most companies that start out, they don't start manufacturing something right away, right? They usually start with R&D. They often have an external partner in the beginning for certification, subcontract the manufacturing, and usually over time they take more things in-house, or they never do, but they might need to manage the compliance and the quality for those as well. So what we see is that actually from a startup R&D phase, we also have customers that already start implementing Odoo at that point, for example, for accounting, for CRM, to already get used to it, and then continue building Odoo while the company develops throughout, the development of the product and the launch and certification of the product. So we can also start early, get people used to the system, and then extend it more and more and more over time. All right, so let's look in all the things that are not part of Odoo Standard. And first, I want to start on a few boxes here. We want to first talk about the really high-level stuff. So management evaluation, regulatory compliance, how does the software validation work, how does the process validation work, and how do we track our processes over time. This is really at the core, right? Because if we don't understand how we can manage the compliance side and how we manage the certification side, why would we even look at Odoo? And for this, we have a handful of strategies that we use to be able to get a very streamlined approach to the certification. The first thing is, obviously, every MedTech company has a bit of a different business model. Maybe it's just hardware, maybe it's hardware-software mixed, maybe it's just wholesaling, maybe it's just maintenance. So we need to look at every company individually based on their risk class, based on their business model, what requirements exist from a regulatory standpoint. Obviously, we do this together with the clients that usually already have a good idea. And then we're going to need to translate this into the requirements and derive the tests straight away from this, which allows us to have a clear connection between the regulation. Is it European? Is it American? Is it both? Which specific rules are there? And what specific requirements can we derive from this? Which then also allows us to create the test lists for the validation ahead of time. Obviously, they get very extensive, especially in big systems. So we don't want to test this by hand every time, which means we're going to implement automated tests that on every increment of the software, we can have a full validation of the system. We can print this out. It's usually like, a good stack for every version, because we tend to have a few hundred automated tests. But it really allows us to put test cases in, to try everything out, to try every path of the process, and to do a fully automated validation. On top of this, there's obviously also human validation at all times, but this really lowers the risk. It's great because we have a lot of documentation about it as well, and it just makes the whole development process faster and more solid, which allows us to actually, change and improve the system over time without having all the regulatory troubles every single time. The third point here, in MedTech, I don't need to tell you, everything needs to be documented both on the technical system side, but also on the process side. And this is really important as well, because this documentation we can then extend in new versions every time we do a release, right? So we can actually also document the improvement process on the system and the process level. So we have this meta documentation here as well. Last but not least, we use a quite elaborate setup with the Odoo data warehouse to do process mining and real-time tracking in dashboards, because most compliance rules are related to how you execute the processes, right? And if you mine these processes and you actually double check if there's exceptions, if something happened, if maybe there's something that should be looked at, that's a high-risk case, we can provide dashboards. Usually we also group them with the codes that we give out for the requirements. So we can actually check which regulatory requirement is on which dashboard, and we have a real-time overview on what's happening in regards to specific rules we have, and we can supervise them. And we have also customers that give access to auditors to these systems, so they can actually ongoingly monitor this a lot easier. All right, so this is all the really meta high-level stuff. How do we get this on the street, and how do we do the implementation strategy to simplify our whole compliance topic in regards of these processes? Now, we're going to look in two more specific processes. One is enhanced traceability. So this is especially if you have hardware or software, if you update software, if you change parts, but also if you have a full manufacturing process in Odoo. This touches a lot of the different processes that I showed earlier. Obviously the quality management, installation, service, PLM and change management. And then obviously the customer handling if they have requests and we service. And we all want to really connect this to have a full line between any product that ever came in, the product being made, the product being delivered, and the product being serviced later on. So this touches a lot of our processes here. And for this, as I already said, we want to have the whole product lifecycle from start to end covered in Odoo. So whatever question anyone asks about anything in relation to any specific device we made or we manufactured, we have all the data available at all times. And Odoo does already a lot for this. So we have all the traceability from purchasing, receipt, to the manufacturing, right? We have customers that have hundreds of serial numbers connected to a final product. We can have a multi-layer manufacturing process that we trace. So there's a lot of stuff here already happening in Odoo. So that is great. So the first core requirement, tracking everything from every level with hundreds or thousands of parts. That is something Odoo is getting very, very good at. In standard, starting with 16, 17, it actually got very, very good. The second point there's still a few gaps. It's about the tracking of the services. So we do a software update, we do a repair. This is something we really need for the lifecycle. And last but not least, let's say I found out, oh, there was a faulty part in a batch, and now I want to exchange all these parts of the batch. It needs to be manageable, right? You don't want to change every serial number on 100 products by hand. So we need efficient mass handling to make your process efficient as well and to avoid errors. So these are the three main things that we're trying to focus on here. And just as this, for this example, we have a quite solid solution. We are using here Odoo Repair for every change, also for software updates. We tag them so we know what kind of repair it is. We connected the repair orders directly on the serial number, so directly connected. We also have a printout for all of this, so for every device that you ship, for every installed base, you can get a full report with everything at any time. And obviously through the repairs, we track the exchange of all the serial numbers, the exchange of software version numbers, and so on and so forth. And obviously if you do remote updates of software, we can use the Odoo API to bring these requests into Odoo so they don't have to be manually created, right? We can automate this all the way. Next, in our repairs, we use a lot of extra categorization, extra dates to fulfill some specific regulations to help us out here. So we can very easily switch parts, but we also have all the information available that we need. And as always, when we talk about MedTech, we track a lot more in Odoo Chatter than you would usually do in Odoo. So for basically every model that we are involved in quality, we add a lot of extra things that Odoo tracks in the chatter, so we have a very, very good history of every change that also happens in these records at any time. So we can also mine these processes and these changes over time. Last but not least, we also connected all of this to help desk. So when we get a customer request on help desk, where we also manage the kappa process, for example, we can directly connect it to the repair and to the serial number. So we also have the customer origin for all of this directly built in. All right, so just one example, how is it done in Odoo? Second example is a point that Odoo has basically no features in, is vendor compliance. You know, we have vendors, we have prices, we can negotiate, we have the RFQs, this is all great, but the vendor compliance, making sure we have the right vendors and they have the right certificates, this is something that doesn't really exist in Odoo standard in a way that Odoo enforces this compliance. And there's three things we want to do here. We want to be able to track our supplier certificates. So we need to know when they expire, when we need to get new ones. We want to rate suppliers, and we need to handle technical drawings and product versions. If they change over time, it's really important to handle those as well. So for this, we actually added a small new Odoo module that brings a certificate process into Odoo. We can categorize suppliers and products into risk groups. We can then, for these risk groups, define required certification, and then we can add these certificates to our suppliers, and obviously we get reminders and can send automated emails to the suppliers if certificates run out. And what we do then with this information is we use it in the process, the purchase process. So when they don't have the certification anymore, when it ran out, we didn't receive the new one, you can actually not purchase a product of that risk group if the supplier misses a certificate for that risk group right now or it ran out. Which also means we can do the entire supplier onboarding through this process by just adding the risk groups to the supplier, adding to the supplier to some products, and automatically get the right documents. If there's any failure, we also check this on your existing inventory. We always have a compliance wizard that tells us right away what compliance documents are missing from what vendor, so you can very easily solve those and get in touch with the vendor quickly to get the certificates. So we don't want to annoy you too much in your process. We want to make it efficient and automated. And last but not least, you really have a lot of extensive ways to also do the supplier evaluation. So we added a lot of features so you can configure supplier evaluation and their criteria, and you can then get a supplier evaluation report for every supplier you have with all the information we have about this. And again, we can set it up for different risk groups, so it can automatically be evaluated again by just adding the risk groups to the products and the suppliers. So this is how we handle supplier and the supplier monitoring in Odoo with one extra module. Okay, so what did we learn from our experience with about 15 MedTech customers? First of all, we learned that you can do all risk groups in Odoo. So here in customer 2 and 3, we did implants like a pacemaker and a hearing implant. It's obviously the highest risk group you have. But you can also use Odoo just to wholesale medical devices and to do some lower risk things like X-ray machines or just some MedTech devices in an ICU unit. We can do all business models, hardware only, software, hardware mixed, wholesale, also custom orders. We have a lot. For example, on our wheelchair control client, every order is custom. We can use Odoo standards to solve most of the problems, and we can close the gap with out-of-the-box features that we add as a partner with a lot of MedTech experience, to make the whole process smoother and customize as little as possible. And then with the right process and all the automated testing capabilities that Odoo gives us, we can really smoothen the certification by thinking it through from the beginning and considering all the impacts from the start. All right, so thank you so much already for listening. There's a question document. If you want to write questions, you can use the QR code on the bottom right side. I know the link is a bit strange. And if you're still curious in getting the slides and contact info, we have this QR code here again, so you can check that out. Thank you so much. Do you have questions for me?
I see questions popping out.
Perfect.
Thank you, Simon, for this very nice presentation.
Thank you so much.
So for now, we're gonna see. I see that questions are coming in the pad. So the first question is, let me read it first so I can understand what it is. Okay. As your Odoo solution is custom made to respect the GXP requirements, does it mean you do not have to work with a certification partner because Odoo is not GXP compliant?
Yeah, so you usually always still need to certify Odoo, especially as soon as you customize any system, you usually need to get your certification. But most of our customers do it together with their process validation. But we're happy to look into the specific case because it's also very different based on the risk groups. There's a lot of different classes that are managed differently. So if there's a specific case, we can also look at that later.
Could you tell us more about your automated tests?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so as you know, Odoo has a very extensive automated test suite with, I think, about 6 figures of tests in Odoo standard. And obviously, we run them on everything we ever do, right? Because we want to make sure that we never break Odoo. And the same tests we can use to validate software. So what we usually do is we create use cases with data sets, and then we create the different process steps, right? It's usually very, very quick, and we base it on the Odoo test framework. And then every time we do a change, we run this test, which basically adds the data, simulates the entire process for all the different processes we do, so there's quite a lot of them. And then we actually, for every single step in the process, there's a specific validation, right? If the expected outcome happened or not. And yeah, and then we generate a report from all these tests, so we know what exactly was tested, what specific compliance requirement does this test specifically belong to, right? So it's easy for the auditors to understand, and what the outcome was. And this also allows us, if something is changed and there's a test failed, to obviously solve it before the code ever goes to production. So this is obviously always done before you release anything. And then our customers usually test a little bit manually as well on new features, if it makes sense on the business side. But this is a great support for the certification processes.
Okay, we still have some questions popping out, but we're running out of time. So I was wondering, can we find you somewhere close for people to ask you more questions?
So our booth is right there, 2 booths to the left here. It's the first booth on the entrance. It's orange and it has good coffee. So if you want a coffee, also come by. And you can also always write us an email. And if you filled out the form, you're also going to get the presentation and contact info. You can schedule a meeting anytime. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you. Okay.